morning, good afternoon, wherever you are when this particular webinar, podcast, however you're listening to it or watching it. Welcome to what I call the Port Security Grant Program Roundtable. We've done this before, and I found that it's really valuable to people, to port authorities and facilities just to listen to see what's coming up, what's the trend, what should we be aware of. I'm Mark Dupont. I'm the Executive Director for the National Maritime Law Enforcement Academy. I have a distinguished panel of guests to sit around the table and talk about this. And I think once you've heard it all, you'll understand why these are the people that I wanted to sit around the table. I'll just give them an opportunity to give a brief introduction, and then we'll get into the conversation. First, Rob LeClaire. Tell us about Rob. Tell us about MOMPS.
Okay,
Welcome.
thanks, Mark. My name is Rob LeClaire. I'm Vice President of the Moran Office of Maritime and Port Security, which is a division of Moran Shipping Agencies. I've been in the maritime business one way or another since 1987. I've been running the MOMPS, which is the acronym for our division, for several years now. I spend most of my time writing facility security plans, amending plans, doing 5-year renewals, all of the MTSA 33 CFR 105 requirements that ports and facilities need, training, exercises, audits, all of those things. And in particular, I spend a lot of time writing and managing grants through the Port Security Grant Program. I started doing that in 2016. I've been able to secure several $1 million for our clients, and also assist them in all of their reporting, reimbursed payments from FEMA, audits, desk reviews, monitoring visits, all of the activities that take place once you receive a grant award, and of course also writing the application and helping them secure the award.
Okay, so what do you do in your spare time? Is there spare time in there? I mean,
just grandkids. That's it.
That's a good focus right there. Rob and I have been working together for a couple, I almost want to say decades. Our relationship with MOMPS and the National Maritime Law Enforcement Academy goes way back, and he's a wealth of information, so I'm happy to have him here. Mark Dabina, from the port perspective, from Port Tampa Bay. Tell us about Mark.
First of all, Mark, thanks for having me on the call today and participate in this webinar. I think it's important for the ports that get a chance to look at this to understand the opportunities that are out there to be safer, more secure, and at the same time be efficient, which we all strive to do. So I'm Mark Dabina. I'm the head of security at the Tampa Port Authority, also known as Port Tampa Bay. I've been in that position for 14 years. I'm a career law enforcement officer in the state of Florida. I've been certified law enforcement officer for over 40 years. Prior to my time here at the port, I was with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and I retired from there as a chief of investigations in the Tampa Bay region. And again, I'm just excited to be on the call with you all today and get a chance to talk about some of the things we've been doing together as a team.
Thank you, Mark. And again, Mark and I also have been together in a long time, back in my life in law enforcement with the state of Florida. So another wealth of knowledge, and I really am happy to have you here to give that port perspective because I think it's important. And we'll talk about something as we go through this Maritime Accreditation and Digitization program, and there's two people that play a critical role in that. One is Luke Ritter from Aries Security Corp. Luke, tell us a little bit about yourself and Aries.
Okay, greetings. My name is Luke Ritter, Senior Vice President for Maritime at Aries Security Corp. I have spent my entire professional life in the maritime industry. I was a former naval officer, spent several years in the industry as an intermodal manager at Tropical Shipping down in Florida. And then I've been delivering technology solutions to maritime entities for the last 20 years or so. Aries is a software company, and we provide digital tools that, as Mark said, help people be more safe, secure, and efficient. Our software has been independently verified and validated by DoD, DOE, and DHS. We have DHS Safety Act certification, and really excited about this opportunity to bring some digital tools into the maritime domain to help folks do what they need to do on the security side more efficiently.
Great. Thank you, Luke. And as Luke said, in giving just a little overview of Aries and their tools, when we were sitting around a table talking about what to do next, that became the foundational building block of what this Maritime Security Accreditation and Digitization program was going to be. And one of the reasons that we felt that Aries was the right partner here is because of something that Luke alluded to very briefly, but that validation from other federal agencies. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. The other partner around that table was Max, and we joke about this, but I think we had our original ideas about what we were going to do here sitting on a beach in the Caribbean at a Caribbean Shipping Association meeting. And it was a good meeting, and obviously it's led to a lot of other things. But Max.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for the opportunity to be on this call this morning. I appreciate it. I'm excited about the accreditation program and the things we've already accomplished and where we can go. My name is Max Bobbies. I'm the practice director for Hudson Cyber. At Hudson Cyber, we started the practice under Hudson Analytics, which is a global maritime risk management company. We've been doing cyber work, mainly advisory, training, and organizational transformation in the context of cybersecurity in ports for the last 8 years. I myself have been working in the port industry since 2006, when I was with a company called Cyber, where we were doing enterprise cybersecurity, both information security and physical security. And that's where I was originally introduced to the Port Security Grant Program. So one of the other things that we are getting more and more involved in that are complementary to this is board advisory work in ports with commissioners and boards of directors, in terms of walking them through and taking them through the cybersecurity transformation that many ports are going through. And the other thing, and we'll probably get into it here as well, is we do a lot of work with cyber insurance companies, or sorry, cybersecurity policies with underwriters and brokers in the global market. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into this.
Great. Thank you, Max. And so just to kind of lay out what we're going to do in our approach here, we'll talk about the Port Security Grant Program. That's where we'll spend the bulk of our time talking about it, what to be aware of, what to be thinking about, how to prepare for the notice of funding opportunity that is on the horizon. We'll look at it in its application specifically for the Maritime Security Accreditation and Digitization program that we've launched here as part of the National Maritime Law Enforcement Academy. We'll talk a little bit about the components and give an opportunity for Luke and Max to get in the weeds a little bit about what those tools provide and the benefits of those tools. We'll circle back to Mark Dubina and just talk about it from a port perspective. You know, what advice can he give other people that might be looking at the Port Security Grant Program? What is his experience, his wealth of years and knowledge in this space? What can he share with everybody else? And we'll close it up with, how can we help? What are some of the things that we can do to help you, and what's next on the horizon? So with that said, I'm going to circle all the way back to the beginning, and I'm going to go to Rob. And you gave a great introduction, Rob. You talked about how you've helped ports and facilities with the Port Security Grant Program. How long have you been doing this?
Well, I started in the maritime industry in '87. On the Port Security Grant side, I've been writing and managing grant awards since 2016.
So, you know, I think I asked that just so I don't feel like I'm the oldest person around the table, or that there's other people that are at least dating me with experience. We heard about Mark's 40 years in law enforcement. So I think there's a depth of knowledge here. If we added up all those years, I think we'd be scared a little bit. But we talked about very briefly this accreditation and digitization program a little bit. if I'm thinking about any port security grant application, let alone that one, what are some of the things that you see that I should be aware of as common mistakes? And you and I have talked about this. It just seems like every year we're looking at the same thing or talking about the same thing. What are some of those common mistakes people are making when they're putting in that application? And not to steal your thunder here, Rob, but what I see happening is they get discouraged because they've made that mistake and they kind of give up, and future opportunities, they're not willing to pursue them because they just like, this is too complicated. I can't do it. And not everybody has the depth of resources that some of the bigger ports have. So back to the question, what do you think some of the common mistakes are?
Well, some of the two of them that come to mind. One that I see quite often relates to the budget detail that the IJ requires. And so to give you an example, if you're looking for a CCTV system, you would not list in the budget CCTV system and the price. You would want to break down the number of cameras, the price for each camera, and then all the other infrastructure, which kind of leads into my the second mistake that I see is that a lot of ports and facilities, they don't engage some of their colleagues who should be involved in determining what the scope of work is and what that budget should entail. So to give you an example, we had someone, I did not write the grant, but someone came to us post-grant, and they had received an award for TWIC readers and cameras several years ago. The problem was they did not account for any of the infrastructure that needed to be in place, such as fiber and electrical, in order for those TWIC readers and cameras to be installed. The cost of that infrastructure ended up costing about twice as much as the equipment itself. So this is why I say when you're doing your scope of work and your budget detail, you should involve, if you have engineers and other staff that can contribute to the scope and provide you with potential line items and infrastructure that you'll need in order for the project to be successful. You need to include them and make sure that those costs are included in your budget and application. So I see that several times, and in fact, some of the awardees ended up not, giving the money back to FEMA because they couldn't afford to fund the additional costs on their own.
So what the big word I heard is detail.
Detail, yeah. So
Detail, get very specific.
Detailed scope, detailed budget.
Yeah, and Mark, I'm going to quote you. You said something when we were talking in preparation of this, and I'll lead the quote. You can finish the quote. But one of the things you said with regard to detail is that we don't have the opportunity to answer questions when this thing goes to approval and it's in a room behind closed doors and people are considering whether or not this should be funded. There's no chance there for us to fill in the gaps with any questions they have. Did I capture your quote accurately, Mark?
Yes, Mark, and I'll add to that every captain of the port area of responsibility handles these things a little differently. Some have a committee that looks at them and reaches back and asks questions, but in some areas of the country, the committee reviews strictly what's on the paper that's been provided to them, the submission to FEMA, and that's what they rely on. So to the point that Rob made, you've got to be pretty clear on what you're trying to accomplish, and you've got to be pretty detailed on what you're asking for. Those tend to be successful grant applications, in my opinion. The ones that kind of have these nebulous, big picture items, but they really don't drill down to what they're trying to accomplish, what they're trying to protect. Those to me are the ones that will tend to have problems when they get to that level of scrutiny by the Coast Guard.
And I just want to add to those listening, if you don't know Mark, He's also very involved with the American Association of Port Authorities. So when he's giving a perspective about what other ports are experiencing, it is valid. He's literally in conversation with ports all across the country. So thank you, Mark. Rob, back to you. So you've been doing this a long time, as we've established, and you talk with the Coast Guard a lot, as does Mark. And we were talking before, and you mentioned something about the biggest gap that you feel that they acknowledge as far as applications or what people don't apply for or underutilized areas of application. What areas, in your experience and in your conversation with the Coast Guard, with FEMA, what is the areas that are most underutilized?
Well, certainly training and exercises are the ones that you see the least amount of requests for. And I have a theory on that. And I work with a lot of different size facilities and ports, but a lot of the smaller facilities, the requirement for 33 CFR 105 facilities who have a facility security plan is they need to conduct an annual exercise. And I think a lot of them just go through the motions. They do the same thing every year, or they participate in some local exercise that Coast Guard and local law enforcement puts on. And they don't look at training and exercises as a critical component of their overall security planning and infrastructure. And they look at some of this as, well, we can get it for free, so why would we spend money on it? But the problem with that is, and of course, active shooter is important, and some of these others, but many of the exercises that I review and see that they do internally are the same thing over and over again. And so they're not getting the benefit of updated information, updated exercise lessons learned. And so I think the Port Security Grant Program offers a great opportunity for them to fund unique training and exercises that they normally wouldn't do on their own. And certainly, but going back to your original question, that is the the category that we see the least amount of applications or requests for.
Could I paraphrase, and tell me if I'm paraphrasing it correctly? But another thing that you and I have talked about is they're looking for innovation. You mentioned it just briefly there with regard to exercises and training, but new ways of doing it. Are they open to those types of things?
Oh, absolutely. I think Coast Guard and FEMA would encourage unique training activities and exercises and other projects too. Certainly what we're working on here with ADaPt. A lot of the funds that are being allocated these days, we know are for cybersecurity. But you look at the TWIC program also, which again has been delayed. So over the last several years, we had TWIC readers funded quite often because we expected the final reader rule to be implemented. Unfortunately, that did not happen. So those funds are available since they're not funding TWIC readers as much. Those funds are available for these other projects, and particularly things like training and exercises and ADaPt. So I think it's a great opportunity for ports and facilities to take advantage of these more available funds now.
So Rob mentioned, our Maritime Security Accreditation and Digitization Program, acronym ADaPt. Have to come up with an acronym, that makes everything work well. But it really epitomizes what the program is about. It's helping a port adapt into this new age, become a smarter port and all that. I'm going to jump over to Luke for a minute, only to emphasize or explore deeper this point that Rob made. He talked about exercises, he talked about training, he talked about innovative ways. That's what the Coast Guard is looking for. That's what money has literally been left on the table because people aren't pursuing that particular avenue. This digital tool that we can provide to ports through the MARSEC ADaPt program, your tool, what does it do with regard to exercises and training?
Great question. All of that ultimately starts with digitalization, and digitalization is the process of transforming your enterprise, digitizing your enterprise, and then using digital tools to digitalize, which is simply taking advantage of that digital posture and doing things smarter and better and more efficiently. So with regard specifically to the things that maritime security professionals have to deal with, namely assessments, training, and exercises, we, as Rob just said, that's an integral component part of the regulatory scheme, and these are requirements that we're all familiar with and have to be done to be compliant. So we can, if you are interested in investing in this process of digitalization, we can do a lot of things to bring digital tools to bear on the requirements. The first step is to create a digital twin. You need that baseline in a digital environment. You need a digital twin of your facility to function as the core of what you're going to be applying. So it's a digital twin is a 3D model of your enterprise and all of the things as a maritime security professional that you're charged with protecting, all of your critical infrastructure. So we'll create a digital twin of that, and then that twin can be used as a baseline to apply other digital tools that make your tasks like assessments, training, and exercises easier, more cost effective, and more efficient. So, and I'll give you an example. If you are doing security assessments manually, usually you need to start with a site survey, and each year you have to resurvey the property and you have to account for all the changes. And this is a manual, labor intensive process, and people are walking around with clipboards and cameras and taking an inventory of all of the physical infrastructure. If you've created a digital twin, you simply need to update that twin with any changes. So you add a camera, you make sure it's in the model. You change a gate from open 6 hours to open 12 hours, you just account for that in the model. And all of those things that used to happen manually and required human interaction and labor can be shifted to the digital side, and that results in efficiencies and cost savings.
Excellent overview. Thank you, Luke. And as the listener will conclude, that's one of the reasons why we made that digital component a foundational block by which the accreditation is based upon. The second part of that equation is the cyber part, and depending on who you speak to, some might argue that should go to the top, unless should be the first thing. We're not going to get into semantics over that, but they're essential elements, let's just put it that way, and they're equal in that regard. And from the cyber perspective, Max, I'm going to jump to you for a minute. Obviously, anybody that's made an application through the Port Security Grant Program will see that is clearly a priority for the Coast Guard and for FEMA. And when you look at it in its entirety, is there any way that what Rob has said with regard to where the gap lies with regard to training, exercises, things like that, the priority of the Coast Guard as it relates to cyber, what Luke was talking about in being able to save money, obviously that's an interest of every port listening and every business person listening. That's just an essential of operations here. What's the cyber part of the puzzle? What do we need to be thinking about? And from an application perspective, what might help a port get to the top of the list as it relates to other people competing for port security grant funds? A lot of questions in there, Max.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a lot to unpack there.
There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, that's fine. That's good. And actually it'll spark additional conversation. But let me start with one thing that we see as a trend across the industry is that when the Port Security Grant Program was initially rolled out, a lot of investment was made in physical security solutions, right? And so a lot of equipment was deployed. But what happened in some cases was that the tools that were deployed and purchased were over-engineered for the mission in some cases, and they became unsustainable with the end user from a financial perspective. Not in every case, but in some cases, right? So with physical security, you have tangible threats. You have gaps at the gate, right? If there's no fence along the border or the perimeter, there's obviously a gap. It's tangible. You can see it. With cyber, it becomes even more challenging. And as a result, what happens is you have a disconnect that emerges in the market. And it's not just the maritime industry, it's all industries where you have a disconnect between buyers and sellers. And the buyers are the ones who control the purse strings in the organization, the chief financial officer, comptroller, whomever. And then you also have the decision makers, the C-suite, the chief operating officer, company security officer, and others. And then when you have the information security professionals come in and talk about the things that are needed, there's also there's a disconnect that often occurs in terms of language. So the gaps tend to become exacerbated when they're manifested in an operating environment, especially when you get into complex operating environments with ports and terminal facilities. So what we try to do is cut through that. And years ago when we started, we rolled out, it was a traditional consulting engagement. It was a year long, a lot was developed, a lot was deployed, and we realized that there still remains that disconnect even in the market. So what we tried to do is create a cost-effective mechanism or solution to cut through that, to help ports and port facilities, port authorities really understand what they have in terms of cybersecurity capabilities, and to facilitate a cross-functional collaboration and dialogue internally within the organization, and drive to an understanding towards, well, what does the organization have from a cybersecurity capabilities perspective? And it's not just IT systems, right? IT systems are important, but it's not just the only thing that must be focused on when it comes to managing cyber risk to a critical infrastructure. There's other things that have to take place. For example, the dialogue that occurs between the facility security officer and the head of information technology, or if there's a CISO in place, that dialogue between the two of them. And Mark, I know you can talk to that in depth based on the things that we've talked about. But driving that collaboration is key. But it's also driving collaboration through things like procurement, operations. You know, one of the things we see is that there's oftentimes maturity in the IT department, but there are significant gaps that may arise or be discovered in terms of how the organization looks at cyber risk in the context of their operational technologies, their OT environment, and also a supply chain, contracting, procurement, how the administrative offices look at cyber risk versus the operational areas. And then if you have facilities, organizations that have dispersed or geographically dispersed environments where you have multiple networks and different stakeholder groups, the complexities compound. So what we've done with PortLogix is to deploy a tool into the market that is a scalable, cost-effective cybersecurity program management, what I call decision support platform. There's a component to that drives assessment and activities. And in this case, it meets the defined cybersecurity requirements along with 4 of the 7 national, the national priorities. And that is, it enhances cyber.
Hang on, Max. We seem to have lost your audio.
Oh,
there we go. We got you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
You were right you're on a roll there. So
I'll just back up for 1 sec. So basically the program meets the defined cybersecurity requirements along with 4 of the 7 national priorities. Basically what it does is it enhances cybersecurity capabilities of the organization. It facilitates an effective planning activity, that cross-functional planning collaboration, and it delivers hands-on training by cross-functionally training and educating within the organization. And it also lays the foundation for cybersecurity tabletop exercises by identifying the specific areas that the organization can actually tailor exercises around it, as well as drills. And so the main thing is to provide that sustainability, that capability in a sustainable fashion at a cost-effective price point that drives that overall continuous improvement over time, which is so important. Because, and as you guys know, cybersecurity experts are expensive in the market, and there is a massive deficiency in terms of those that are available in the maritime transportation sector. And so what we've tried to do is provide that tool to end users so that they can use it to sustain their organizational capabilities over time.
So there's a lot of detail there, and I think that, I thank you for providing all of it, because I think it's important for people to hear. This isn't just a one-stop type, solution here. There's a lot of parts that are involved, and I'll come back to Mark Dabina in a minute here, just to talk about someone who's gone through that process and talk specifically about what the outcomes of that were. But you touched upon something that, Max, you touched upon something that Luke said, and Luke, you picked up off of what Rob was saying with regard to this gap. We talked about training and exercise. You've mentioned how that could be included. So what we're seeing here, and hopefully everybody's understanding why Max and Hudson Analytics and their PortLogix tool in particular was chosen to be a part of this accreditation program. I've mentioned a lot about that. Let me just talk about that for 5 minutes, just to give people a little bit more detail. And of course, if you want to learn more about what that program is all about, there's a link provided below, and you'll be able to just click on that. You can see a whole bunch of things about it. But what we concluded back in 2017, we, the National Maritime Law Enforcement Academy, wrote a white paper about smarter ports. How do you make America's ports smarter? What are the things that we should be looking at? What's the future look like? And one of the things that was a key element of that paper was providing ports with resources and solutions. Everything seemed to be broken apart in disparate pieces. And for a port to get all the things that they needed and make good business decisions, it was difficult. And we proposed that there be some sort of alliance of resources that we could bring to a port and say, hey, whatever you need, we've got these resources here, and they're validated, they're vetted. This isn't just a sales show, a trade show. These are resources that you can tap into if you so choose. Fast forward to 2022, we sat around a table, much from discussions that this group began, that's on this particular webinar right now, sitting at the round table now. But we looked at, okay, where are we right now? And let's do something about that. We said that's what ports need, but let's do something about it. And what came from conversations with key stakeholders all across the maritime domain, including former Coast Guard admirals, including port authorities, including the private sector, including the public sector, everybody, we've formulated what the key ingredients were for what people needed right now. They were the digitization that Luke talked about. They were the cyber component that Max is talking about. They were the training and exercises part. They were intel and information sharing. That was a key gap, and that was driven by our key advisor in that role, the National Maritime Intelligence and Integration Office. So the other part of it was the workforce. How do we improve our workforce? And post-pandemic, by the way, everybody on this call can attest, and everybody listening, I'm sure, can validate, that workforce challenge is not gone away, and it's actually increasing. So how do we prepare our workforce? How do we shape the workforce of the future? So one of the elements of the accreditation program are to look at how you train your people. Are you aligned with any higher level institution? And so what we decided is, let's bring all of these tools to the table, and let's offer it to a port that wants to partake in this process. And if they partake in the process, they should be recognized for that. They've taken these steps to adapt, hence the acronym. They've taken these steps to adapt to what the new world looks like. They've digitized themselves. They've looked at their cyber posture and adopted a maturity model. They've looked at how they're training their people. They have looked at how they share their information. and they've actually navigated through the process. That's another part of the domain that we use to assess a port in achieving this particular accreditation. So that's an overview of the program and all the ingredients. And what we try to do is say to a port, hey, you might have these things now, you might have these elements, but if you don't, we're going to bring them for you. And if you don't have any of them, let me just cut to that chase. Let me just put that out on the table so everybody understands what it is. If you have nothing, if you have no ways of creating a digital twin, a digital model, if you have no ways of establishing a cybersecurity maturity model, if you have no ways of or at least extending how you train your people, we will provide all of that for a price of $75,000 for a year, and it requires a 3-year commitment. Okay, so now that I've put that on the table, I want to come back to Rob. We've heard what these things, these elements that can be part of this application through this accreditation program. Let me ask you, what are the steps that a port or facility should take now to prepare them for what that NOFO, that notice of funding opportunity that's on the horizon, and the indicators are that it's not far on the horizon, that'll be coming out sooner than later, only because funds have all been approved and all that. So we expect to see that early. What should they do in preparation, Rob? What do we do now? Because, and I ask that question because I know you will attest to this. We've had some very short windows, right, for that grant program. And, you know, it's literally opened on the 1st of a month and it's closing on the 25th. And some people just can't get it all together in that 25-day period, especially if something's changed, if the requirements have changed in some way, if the template's changed, and they might not have the resources to adapt as quickly. So I like to promote preparation in advance, hence the reason why we're having this webinar and doing it now. What should they do now? How do we prepare for this?
Well, that's a good question, Mark. And I think anybody that hasn't started yet, they're already almost late to the game, especially since we expect the NOFO for this year to be out earlier. A couple of things that come to mind right away. Number one, if their SAM.gov, System of Award Management.gov registration is not active, they need to get that activated as quickly as possible. It can take time. I have seen applicants miss the deadline because their SAM.gov registration was not activated in time. So that's something that one of the first things or the first thing that they should do. The other thing that I see quite a bit also is when they're trying to prepare their budgets, they are not able to get vendors out in time to give them accurate, detailed quotes on whatever project that they're working on. You know, after COVID, a lot of things are backlogged. A lot of vendors are having difficulty finding people. They have a work backlog that came about during COVID. Projects were delayed, so now they're working on them. And so getting vendors out to quote on these particular projects has been an issue for some of our clients, and depending on what the project is. Some of these projects, especially equipment, have long lead times. They can't quote accurately because they're not sure when they'll get their equipment. So this process needs to start now. And hopefully by the time they're ready to write the application and submit their IJ to FEMA, they'll have accurate information. So you know, again, my suggestion is if you haven't started, start today.
Is there an opportunity where we can help someone that might need some help in preparing that investment justification?
Absolutely.
And other things?
You know, we can take them from A to Z. So we can help them obtain their SAM.gov registration. We can help them obtain all of the other information that they need in order to prepare. If they would like us to, you know, we can even write the application, the IJ, help them prepare the budget, all of the elements that are required to prepare and submit a successful application. We can assist them with.
And just so everybody knows, a direct link to Rob will be provided at the bottom of this webinar. and also a template IJ investment justification, say that quickly, Mark. So you can just see some of the language that is important to have there. And again, I'll emphasize the point we made early on. It's about detail, right, Rob?
Right. Well, and I excuse me, I just wanted to mention one thing that Max made a great point. If they are writing the application on their own, Max had mentioned about addressing the national priorities, Port Logic's 4 out of 7. Again, going into detail, when you get to that section, what the program priority, which program priority it addresses, and then what other national priorities and core capabilities from the national preparedness goals that it addresses. I would put as much information in that section as possible. So if you're just applying for cybersecurity, it also influences and addresses other national priorities and core goals. So you want to include as many of those as possible in your application.
And this goes back to something that we said earlier. So if someone was applying to fund their Maritime Security Accreditation and Digitization program, they wanted this whole thing. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Rob, they're going to put in that justification, one of the details is obviously it comes under cyber for obvious reasons, and that's a high priority, but it's also going to hit these other things that are also equal priorities, these things like training, these things like exercises, these things like vulnerability assessments. So that's very important. Just saying getting maritime security accredited isn't necessarily enough. And again, to Mark Dubina's point, don't assume the people reading this understand exactly what you're saying. Give them all the details and avoid a situation where there's a question that's asked and you're not in the room to answer it. Am I accurate in that, Rob?
You're absolutely accurate. And I think that's the advantage that this MARSEC accreditation program has, is that it addresses multiple priorities and preparedness goals. And I think it has an excellent chance of being funded if written correctly by the applicant.
One last question, Rob. Well, I'm sure I might have another one, but the last one that's in my mind right now, I just mentioned something about this being a 3-year commitment. In the Port Security Grant Program, can they apply for something that's a 3-year program, 3-year commitment?
Yeah, so they can apply for this, and then they can reapply as the 3 years winds down. So, the period of performance for awards is 3 years, and that doesn't include any possible extensions. We've seen some COVID-related extensions that have been granted over the last couple of years, but as that grant is about to expire, certainly they can apply. We see this like with K9, K9 services, where they have a 3-year commitment, but Coast Guard and FEMA would like to see them continue, especially if the program is successful. And so we reapply for that, for those funds, and continue the service. And I would think that this would fall under the same type of situation where they can reapply at the near the end of the 3 years.
Okay, that's a key point. Thank you for sharing that. Luke, I'm going to come to you, then I'm going to jump over to Max, and then I'll land to kind of wrap this up with Mark, unless, of course, we go down a different pathway. But Luke, we talked about this digitization part. We get it. We understand how to put our grant application together. We understand the priorities that this is going to fall under. But I'm just curious, is the digitization part important to the Coast Guard? And if so, why? Or how?
Yeah, I think we can definitely say it is. And that's actually come from direct input from the Coasties. But all of the benefits that accrue from digitalization and applying these digital tools are essentially focused on security compliance functions. So training, assessments, and exercises are all regulatory requirements. And so, there is a direct interest in that case. If regulated entities are doing those things better and more efficiently, it's in the interest of the Coast Guard to support that. But we also know that they're keenly interested in this digital data. As ports create digital twins and create a digital record and a 3D model of their critical infrastructure, we think that there's a national security priority that could be tied to collaborating with the ports and eventually building what would become a national digital library of critical infrastructure. That doesn't exist now, but we've literally discussed that with the Coast Guard, and they think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I think that's important. My final question, we've mentioned this, I think we've been good in explaining how the MARSEC ADaPt program covers all of these particular areas, including exercise, training, vulnerability assessment, cybersecurity. I get it. But is there real cost savings that a port can expect, and how? Where does that cost savings come into play? And then I'm gonna get called out by Mark Dabina, so we'll validate what we're talking about here and ask him for some specific indicators. But Luke, where would you say that someone can expect to see that ROI?
Yeah, again, that ROI is focused on the budget that's allocated for security compliance. Applying these digital tools ends up saving money and making you more efficient when you're doing assessments, training, and exercises. So anyone that's hosted or conducted an exercise knows good and well how labor intensive that is, and how difficult it can be on the logistics side to manage a actual physical exercise. So when you digitalize and use digital tools, you can have the same impact and conduct the same exercise virtually, which has some obvious savings on the labor side and the logistics side. Same thing with training. Our tools enable virtual training. So there's a pickup there on the labor side. There's some efficiencies that have to do with being able to log into training either on demand or from a remote location, instead of having to pay for everyone to come together and be standing in the same room with a trainer of some sort that's got to be paid every time they travel and perform their services. So it has to do with labor and logistics, I think, primarily, and working smarter and more efficiently. There's significant cost savings that roll up into really good ROI. What we experience with most of our customers is a 2 to 3 year or less return on investment to pay for these tools.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Max, let me come over to you and ask kind of the same question. Is there something that someone might expect as a return on that investment, looking purely at the cyber perspective? Obviously, in the whole program, Luke has just laid out a lot of areas, from vulnerability assessments to exercises to training. How about in your space on the cyber?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And one thing I should mention here. So with our methodology, not only do we align with the NAVIC 01-20, the NIST cybersecurity framework, which will be soon be updated, but also CISA has recently published cross-sector cybersecurity performance goals, and it even exceeds the cybersecurity resilience reviews that DHS has published. But to your question, right? And my earlier point about a disconnect between buyers and sellers, we take a capability analysis to identify specifically where the organization has gaps, where there might be weaknesses, as well as where there are strengths. Because all too often, investment planning inside the executive management team doesn't necessarily always get fully informed about what is most appropriate from managing cyber risk to the organization. Now, cyber risk is really a balance sheet risk management activity. And so although we comply with the NAVIC and the requirements under the Coast Guard, and we support the cyber annex methodologies and the requirements therein, you actually get that balance sheet perspective on how to most effectively and efficiently allocate precious resources being your people, your processes, your tools, and your money, both from a CapEx and an OpEx perspective. And ultimately, and I alluded to this earlier, that also is intended to inform risk transfer decisions where you start talking about insurance. So certainly while we have, the compliance requirements and the things that have to happen therein, we're also looking at risk transfer conversations, and the disconnects on cyber when we get into the world of cyber insurance are actually even greater than in the investment planning in terms of tools and resource allocation with people. So informing that process, again, evolves into more of a balance sheet conversation, and it's about driving that effective and efficient and sustainable allocation of resources within the organization itself.
Thank you, Max. I think that is so important for everybody to hear, because I think it's so much greater than just a thing, a firewall, a tool. It goes so much deeper into the organization. And I hope what people are hearing is that that's what the essence of this Maritime Security Accreditation and Digitization program is all about. It's a whole of community approach. It's looking at all those things, as Luke so eloquently said. It's about getting those tools to go into the digital age to help them get there, but become more efficient and effective in how they do things. And we know that's driving every port in the country. How can we be more efficient? How can we? This is a low margin industry and a highly regulated industry. So the last thing we want to do is, put more mandates out there or more requirements. And that was the essence of developing this program, that a port can choose to do if they want to, or if they don't want to, they don't have to do it. Mark Dubina, you went through it. You were the first in the country to take this step. I have a couple of questions to ask you. It's kind of the first opening one. Was it worth it? I mean, did you took time? It took a period of 6 months or so to go through this entire process. What did it do for you, if anything?
Well, it did a lot. First of all, to kind of wrap it all together on the grant side of it, we had existing grants for cybersecurity assessments. We had existing grants for maritime domain awareness, and we had existing grants to try to upgrade our ability to do good assessments of our physical security. So it was really kind of a no-brainer for us to take advantage of those existing grants that we might have used in a different venue and put them towards an integrated approach that focused on the total port. And what I mean by that is there's still a lot of disconnect between cyber and physical security. And sometimes it's a function of the organization, the way it's structured. Sometimes it's a function of communication between those entities that are responsible for that. And then sometimes it's just a function of people don't have time to really collaborate because they're so busy in their daily activities. What the process does is it does force you to look at every type of thing that you should be concerned about, not only as a port security professional, but also what's important to the federal government, the agencies that are regulating you, the agencies that are providing you grant money. And what's important to them is maritime domain awareness, training and exercise, and cybersecurity. Those are highlights of every port security grant I've seen in the last couple of years. I don't think there's any reason to think that's going to change anytime soon because they are important. So really, it was a function for me of being able to actually efficiently meet all these different goals in one package. I'll use one example, which is the example of PortLogix, the cyber solution that's within this. What it does is it gets people within the organization collaborating to answer the questions. So it's beyond the security director, it's beyond the chief information officer. It involves the procurement department, involves human resources when it comes to training for cybersecurity, which is a major component. It involves the legal department. It involves the finance department. And so what you're actually doing is you're getting people in these other areas that you have to work with and that are also helping you compete for funds within the organization to understand the nuances of what you're trying to accomplish and buy into it. That PortLogix, along with the AVERT system that Ares provides, those are living, breathing instruments. you can update those at any time. I look at things like whether it's a physical assessment or a cyber assessment. Most of the time, that's a snapshot in time. It tells you where you were that minute. And for every additional minute, hour, day that you get away from that snapshot that you took, it's probably less accurate as to where you actually are now. If you're diligent and use the tools as they're provided, it's a fairly easy way to keep up with where you actually stand in each of these processes and where your gaps still exist. So instead of going through this cycle that I've seen so many ports do, including my own, where you go out, you get an assessment, it sits on a shelf, nobody really looks at it. They come back 2 years later, 3 years later, they get an assessment. Some of the same problems pop up again, along with additional problems that really should have been addressed already, but kind of sat there waiting for someone to point them out. And that's really the advantage of this whole process. It gives you that ability to really just kind of grow with your organization. And if you're like a lot of other ports like we are, your footprint is growing every day. Your client makeup is growing every day or changing every day. Sometimes your product, what's coming through your port is changing on a regular basis. So these are all things that when you use that term adapt, you're adapting to what is happening in your port, in which it's changing every day. So I hope that answered your question, Mark.
It did very well and very detailed. The last question I have in that regard is an overview as you look back at the port security grant, and I'll give everybody an opportunity to add to anything that we may have not covered already. But as you look forward, if you had one thing that you could tell them, Mark, in general about their future port security grant application, what would it be?
Well, within that notice of funding opportunity, we can anticipate things that aren't going to change. Cybersecurity is a priority. It's not going to change. Maritime domain awareness is a priority. It's not going to change. We are underutilizing, as Rob stated correctly, we are underutilizing, not in my opinion, in the opinion of FEMA, we're underutilizing the exercise component of these grants, and we're underutilizing the training component of these grants. Usually you're using exercises to identify gaps in a lot of different areas, physical, cyber, but also your training gaps. Where are your people failing to actually change with the environment they're in? And so this solution gives that opportunity also, and it hits some key points that FEMA, the Coast Guard are really concerned about. So it's really, not only should you be concerned as a port security professional or as a cybersecurity professional, but things that the federal government's told you are important to them when they issue these grants. I want to say just quickly, Mark, about the accreditation process. It's very thorough, but it's not arduous. If you're really serious about examining your facility, you're going to put the time in anyway. If you go to a traditional NIST assessment for cyber, if you go to a traditional bring in a team of people to look at your physical security for an assessment for the Coast Guard, you're going to go through this anyway. Why not produce something that's a living, breathing document that you can go back to over and over again and keep using instead of reinventing the wheel? So I guess when people say, was it hard? It's structured to actually test what you are doing. What are you really hitting these goals that you should expect of yourself and that the government expects of you as somebody providing you a grant? So I would say to anybody, you're going to spend the time anyway. Spend it on something that's logical, that's not disjointed, but actually just brings all these different competing solutions together in a package where you have experts that are also helping you, which helped us. I can't say enough. I've never seen a port that says to me, I have enough security officers, I have enough compliance managers, I don't need any more resources. That absolutely does not exist in the port security world. So anytime that you can take and combine everything into a package that meets all your goals, does it in an efficient way, and also tells, one of the feedback I really like about the process is the fact that ports and including people that run ports are great at saying, I have the best port in the world, no matter what it is. It's the best port to bring cargo through. It's the most secure port, all those things. When you go through this process, you can tell your CEO, you can tell your board if you have one, you could tell your community stakeholders, you could tell your local political leaders that you are what you say you are. You are an advanced port. You are a secure port because you have an independent body with independent professionals that have evaluated that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Great comments. Luke, anything that you would leave as a one-liner, if you will, to suggest to people that are listening to this, the one key ingredient going forward?
Yeah, my comments are very closely related to Mark's, and it essentially boils down to the fact that this is a really unique situation where everybody wins.
Mhm.
If a port asks for the feds to provide grant money to support accreditation, the feds are getting something they want. They want people to be asking for grants for training and exercises, assessments, compliance related functions. They want people to digitalize, and they want to encourage that instinct. And eventually they want these digital twins so they can have a national library of critical infrastructure. So there's a lot in there for the federal government to get something that they want as they provide this grant support. And then, of course, the ports get all kinds of things that they want and need. They get the tools, they get the tangible evidence of their security and resiliency that can then be used for insurance purposes, and as Mark said, to differentiate their service in the marketplace. And they get a way to offset some of their compliance budget. So there really are no natural enemies to any of this. It's truly a situation where asking for the federal government to help support MARSEC accreditation is a situation where all parties benefit, and I think it's a great opportunity.
Great points. Thank you, Luke. Max, any word of advice you would give to those listening as they go forward? The one takeaway, if you will.
Sure. I would say don't look at compliance as incompatible with cyber or organizational cyber resilience, because the world is going through a digitalization evolution that is happening very, very quickly. And really what we're talking about here as a group, whether we're from the vendor side or from the client side or from the grant writing or the audit perspective, it's about revisiting the way of looking at managing risk in a way that is holistic, sustainable, and meaningful as part of a continuum or a continuous improvement process over time. As Mr. Dabina said, when you do an assessment, you're really taking a snapshot of where you are at that moment. And especially when we're talking about ones and zeros. So when we talk about managing risk from a holistic perspective, and we're looking at advocating for compliance under the Coast Guard mandates or the new NIST regime that will be released in the coming months and years, we're talking about managing risk to the balance sheet. And it's about how you as an organization are doing that in a sustainable fashion, but also a meaningful way that can deliver results to your organization on a going forward basis. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all impacted by cyber threats, some sooner than others, but it's really a question of how resilient you're going to be on a going forward basis in your digitalization activities.
Excellent points. Last but not least, Rob, final comment, words of advice to those listening?
Well, I just want to reiterate what I said earlier is if you haven't gotten started yet and you want to apply for a grant, I would get started immediately. And then also to the points that Max, Mark, and Luke made also, we're in a world where it's not just physical security anymore, it's cybersecurity. And Mark, you and I, before we started this recording, we were talking about the challenges that I had faced doing the cyber amendments for facility security plans last year, and actually getting IT people and cybersecurity personnel from ports and facilities involved in helping prepare those assessments and amendments. And it was, for some, it was like pulling teeth, and we got some very poor information. So bringing in everyone, your IT department, your cybersecurity personnel, and everyone else within the port or facility who has a role in security, whether it be physical or cyber, and now the commingling of both is very important, and those people need to be involved from day one. So that would be my recommendation also.
Great points. My final comment or word of advice is that hopefully we've gone through this roundtable discussion and you've heard pieces of information that will help frame your future, help frame your application, and hopefully we've given you a pathway that will truly enhance and elevate your security, both from a physical and cyber perspective, the training of your workforce. Hopefully we've shown you a way to get there. Hopefully we've also provided help. This program was originally designed to do just as I described, give the resources to the ports. Each one of these speakers has mentioned these words in different ways, but sustainability, allow this to be sustained over time. Whether or not we were here or not, have we given you tools that can help you as you go forward? And last but not least, can we elevate the security of all ports in the United States? And that's our goal. That's why we did this. Hopefully we've given you some things to think about. As I said before, there's links down below of this webinar where you can click on and talk directly to every person that's been involved in this discussion. If you need actual help or need deeper understanding of any of those components, again, talk to any one of us. We'll give you the tools to get you there. Thank you for listening. Hopefully we're all a little better off as this grant comes out. We're prepared for it and we can apply it and truly enhance the security of America. Thanks for taking the time.